Senior Observer Krell adjusted the viewing lens of his monitoring station and blinked all four of his eyes in rapid succession. He had been stationed on Observation Post 7 for nearly 3 standard rotations now. His job was simple. Watch the human colonists, document their behaviors, report anything unusual to the Galactic Council. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for what he was witnessing on the surface of Nexer Prime. The planet had been classified as a Category 4 death world. The Galactic Council had approved human settlement only because no other species wanted it. The atmosphere was breathable but harsh. The terrain was difficult. And the wildlife was absolutely terrifying. Nexer Prime was home to creatures that made even the bravest Kellyan warriors turn their ships around and find somewhere else to colonize. Yet here were the humans. Not just surviving, thriving, and doing something that defied every known law of interspecies behavior. Krell pulled up his communication device and began recording his daily report. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. The human colonists have been on the surface for approximately 18 local months. Initial observations suggested standard settlement patterns. They built shelters. They established agricultural zones. They created defensive perimeters. All of this was expected and documented in previous reports. However, recent developments require immediate attention from the Council. He paused and looked back at the viewing screen. A human female was walking along a dirt path near the main settlement. Behind her walked a creature that Krell knew very well from the planetary database. It was called a Vorak by the survey teams. Standing at nearly 1.5 meters at the shoulder, the Vorak was one of the most efficient predators on Nexer Prime. It had 6 powerful legs, retractable claws made of a bone-like substance, harder than most metals, and jaws that could crush through solid rock. Its dark purple scales provided natural armor against attacks. Its 4 eyes could see in multiple light spectrums. The creature should have been tearing the human apart. Instead, it was walking calmly beside her. Its massive tail swayed gently from side to side. The human reached down and scratched behind one of its 4 ears. The Vorak made a low rumbling sound and leaned into her touch. Krell felt his stomach turn. This was impossible. This was wrong. This violated everything he understood about predator-prey relationships. He continued his report. The human colonists appeared to have formed some kind of bond with the local apex predators known as Voraks. This observer has documented at least 47 separate instances of humans interacting with these creatures in a manner consistent with companionship rather than conflict. The creatures respond to human vocal commands. They allow physical contact. They follow humans into and around the settlement without displaying any predatory behaviors. 3 weeks earlier, Krell had watched in horror as a young human child wandered away from the settlement. The child could not have been more than 5 or 6 standard cycles old. Small, vulnerable, completely defenseless against the dangers of Nexer Prime. A Vorak had emerged from the tree line. Krell had prepared to document what he assumed would be a tragic but expected outcome. Humans were foolish to bring their young to such a dangerous world. The child would be consumed, and the colony would learn a harsh lesson about the realities of life on a death world. But that was not what happened. The Vorak had approached the child slowly. The child had looked up at the massive predator with no fear in its eyes. It had smiled, actually smiled. Then it had reached out and touched the creature on its snout. The Vorak had lowered itself to the ground. The child had climbed onto its back. And then the creature had walked the child back to the settlement where its parents were waiting. The parents had not screamed. They had not attacked the creature. They had thanked it. One of them had given it food. The Vorak had eaten the offering and then returned to the forest. Krell had submitted an emergency report that day. The council had responded with confusion and disbelief. They had asked for more documentation, more evidence. They had suggested that perhaps Krell was experiencing stress-related hallucinations. But Krell was not hallucinating. The humans were genuinely forming relationships with creatures that should have been their natural enemies. He had spent many days trying to understand how this was possible. He had reviewed human history. He had studied their homeworld. And slowly, a terrible realization had begun to form in his mind. The humans had done this before. Their original planet, a small world called Earth, had also been home to dangerous predators, creatures called wolves, large felines, bears, crocodilians, venomous serpents. By all logical standards, early humans should have been exterminated by these threats long before they achieved technological civilization. But they had not been exterminated. They had survived. And more than that, they had formed bonds with their predators. They had taken wolves into their homes and turned them into something called dogs. These creatures had become so attached to humans that they would die to protect them. They had done the same with wild cats, creating smaller companions that shared their living spaces. They had even formed working relationships with birds of prey and large herbivores. Humans did not just coexist with dangerous animals. They befriended them. They integrated them into their society. They loved them. Krell found this deeply disturbing on a fundamental level. He returned to his viewing screen and focused on a different part of the settlement. A large human male was working in one of the agricultural zones. Beside him lay 3 young Orcs. They were smaller than the adults, their scales still showing the mottled pattern of juveniles. They watched the human work with curious eyes. Occasionally, one of them would wander off to investigate something interesting. The human would call out a word and the creature would return to his side. The humans had given the Orcs names. Krell had intercepted enough communications to compile a list: Brutus, Fang, Shadow, Princess, Rex, Thunder, names that suggested both respect for the creatures, power, and genuine affection. The colonists had even modified their shelters to accommodate their new companions. Large doors had been installed to allow the creatures to move freely in and out. Sleeping areas had been constructed with reinforced flooring to support the Orcs' considerable weight. Feeding stations had been established where the colonists shared meat from their hunts with the predators. It was a partnership. An impossible, illogical, completely unexpected partnership. Krell had submitted 12 reports over the past 3 weeks. Each one had been met with increasing alarm from the Council. They had dispatched additional observers to verify his findings. All of them had confirmed what Krell had documented. The humans were domesticating the apex predators of a Category 4 death world. The most recent Council communication had included a troubling question. If humans could form these bonds with Orcs, what else might they be capable of domesticating? Krell had no answer to that question, but he suspected the Council already knew what he was thinking. Humans were not like other species. They did not simply avoid danger. They did not merely survive threats. They embraced them. They transformed them. They turned enemies into allies and predators into protectors. On the surface below, a group of human children was playing in an open field. They were running and laughing and shouting. Among them ran 4 juvenile Orcs, their movements playful rather than predatory. One of the children fell, and a Orc immediately moved to stand over her, its body positioned between the child and any potential threat. When the child stood up and brushed herself off, the Orc relaxed and returned to the game. The creatures were protecting the humans, not hunting them, protecting them. Krell recorded his final notes for the day. This observer recommends that the Galactic Council reconsider its classification of human colonization efforts. Previous assessments suggested that humans posed minimal risk to galactic stability due to their relatively small population and limited territorial ambitions. However, recent observations suggest that human capabilities have been significantly underestimated. Their ability to form bonds with dangerous species appears to be a core aspect of their nature rather than isolated behavior. If this pattern continues, human colonies may become significantly more defensible than previously calculated. Local predators that would threaten other species may instead become assets to human settlements. The implications for galactic security are unclear but potentially significant. This observer also notes a personal concern. The humans appear to genuinely care for these creatures. The bonds they form are not merely practical, they are emotional. They invest time and resources in the well-being of their animal companions far beyond what would be necessary for simple utility. This observer does not fully understand this behavior, but this observer has begun to wonder if perhaps it represents something the Council should study rather than fear. End of daily report. Krell saved the recording and leaned back in his chair. Through the viewing screen, he watched as the sun began to set on Nexar Prime. The human colonists were gathering in the central area of their settlement. The Orcs gathered with them, their massive bodies creating a protective circle around the smaller humans. Someone had started a fire. Music was playing. The humans were singing and talking and laughing. The Orcs were calm, their eyes half closed, their bodies relaxed. Some of the children were using the resting predators as furniture, leaning against their warm scales or even lying across their backs. It was peaceful. It was domestic. It was completely wrong, according to everything Krell had been taught about the natural order of the galaxy. And yet he could not look away. There was something beautiful about what the humans had created, something that spoke to possibilities Krell had never considered. Perhaps the galaxy was not simply divided into predators and prey, threats and victims, dangers and survivors. Perhaps there was room for something else. Something the humans seemed to understand instinctively. Partnership, trust, family. Krell made a decision. He would continue his observations. He would submit his reports. But he would also try to understand. Not just document, but understand why the humans did what they did and how they achieved what should have been impossible. The Galactic Council could do what they wished with his reports. But Krell suspected that the humans and their new companions represented something important. Something the galaxy had not seen before. A species that did not simply survive on death worlds. A species that made those worlds their home. And made the creatures of those worlds their family.